My husband stood up at our anniversary dinner and called me just a housewife who got lucky in front of his whole office. I smiled and said nothing, but 3 days later I found out I controlled the one thing his career depended on. He had no idea what was coming. Before you keep watching, I need you to promise me something. If you've ever sat quietly while someone made you feel small, while your whole body screamed to speak up, but you swallowed it instead, stay with me until the end, because what happened to me didn't just change my marriage, it changed who I was, and I think some of you need to hear this today. Type, "I hear you, Olivia," in the comments if you're still here. Let's begin. I used to think humiliation was loud, shouting, slammed doors, a scene you could see coming from a mile away. I was wrong. The worst humiliation of my life happened with a smile on his face and a glass of wine in his hand. My name is Olivia. I was 34 years old, married 10 years, and I thought I understood my husband, Derek, better than I understood myself. That night we were celebrating our anniversary at a restaurant he picked, a nice place downtown, the kind with candles that never seem to melt and waiters who never rush you. His whole team from work was there too, 8 people, his boss included. I didn't know that until we walked in. I remember what I was wearing, a soft gray dress I'd bought 2 weeks earlier just for this night. I remember feeling pretty for the first time in months. I remember thinking, tonight is going to be good. I was wrong about that too. Dinner started fine, small talk, polite laughter. Derek's boss, a tall man named Grayson, asked me what I did for work. I told him I used to teach elementary school, but I'd stepped back years ago to help run our home while Derek climbed the ladder at his firm. Grayson smiled and nodded like that was a perfectly normal answer. Then Derek laughed, not a warm laugh, a short, sharp one. "She makes it sound so noble," he said, swirling his wine. "Really, she just didn't want to work anymore." The table chuckled. I felt my face go hot, but I told myself, he's joking. He's nervous in front of his boss, let it go. I let a lot of things go that night. I wish I hadn't. Halfway through dinner, Derek stood up with his glass raised. This was the moment I thought would be sweet. 10 years of marriage, a toast, something to remember. "To Olivia," he said, smiling at the table, not at me. "The woman who's been by my side for 10 years, doing absolutely nothing while I built everything we have." Laughter, real laughter this time, not nervous, not polite, genuine, easy laughter like he'd told the funniest joke of the night. I sat there frozen, my fork halfway to my mouth, watching people I'd never met laugh at a version of my life that wasn't true. I ran our household. I managed every bill, every appointment, every piece of his life he never had to think about because I thought about it for him. And in one sentence, in front of strangers, he turned 10 years of my work into nothing. I put my fork down. I didn't say a word. I smiled, because that's what you do when you don't want to become the topic of the whole restaurant. Grayson leaned over to me, still chuckling, and said, "Lucky girl, huh, got yourself a good deal." I nodded. I actually nodded. That's the part that still makes my chest tight when I think about it. I nodded and agreed that I was lucky, while the man who was supposed to protect me from moments exactly like this one sat there enjoying the laughter. Dinner ended around 10. Derek said he wanted to stay a little longer with his coworkers, network a bit, he called it. He didn't offer to walk me to the car. He didn't seem to notice I hadn't said a word in 20 minutes. So I left, alone. I walked 8 blocks home because I needed the air, needed the time to think, needed anything other than sitting in a cab replaying that toast over and over. Walking those 8 blocks, something shifted in me. I started remembering things I had buried without realizing it. The way he'd introduce me at parties as my wife, she's home with the kids, we don't have kids, but somehow that lie sounded better to him than the truth. The way he corrected me in front of friends about things I knew more about than he did. The way he'd sigh when I offered an opinion on his work, like my opinion couldn't possibly matter. This wasn't the first time, it was just the loudest. By the time I got home, I wasn't crying anymore. I was just tired in a way that felt permanent. I went into his office to grab a phone charger, something I'd done 100 times before, and that's when I saw it, a folder on his desk that wasn't usually there, sitting open like he'd forgotten to put it away. I shouldn't have looked, but after that dinner, something in me had stopped caring about lines I used to respect. Inside were bank statements, not our joint account, a separate one, transfers, numbers that didn't match what he told me about his salary, and a letter from a financial advisor talking about restructuring joint assets before the fiscal year ends. Restructuring joint assets, my assets, without a single conversation with me. I sat down at his desk and read through everything twice. My hands were steady, which surprised me. I think I expected to feel rage. Instead, I felt something colder, something clearer. I put the folder back exactly where I found it and went to bed. Derek came home around midnight, smelling like whiskey and cologne that wasn't his own. I pretended to be asleep. The next morning, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. "Is this Olivia?" a man's voice asked. "My name is Mr. Whitfield. I'm an attorney. I'm calling about an estate matter concerning your late grandfather." I almost hung up. I thought it was a scam. My grandfather passed away when I was 22, and we hadn't been close in his final years. My mother had a falling out with him long before I was born, something about pride and money and things I never fully understood. But Mr. Whitfield knew details only a real attorney would know. My grandfather's full name, my mother's maiden name, the town where he was buried. He asked if I could come into his office that afternoon, something about a trust that had reached its release date. I didn't tell Derek where I was going. After the night before, I didn't feel like I owed him an explanation for anything anymore. The attorney's office was small but neat, tucked above a bakery downtown. Mr. Whitfield was older, maybe 70, with reading glasses perched on his nose and a manner that made me feel like I was the only person in the world he had time for that day. "Your grandfather," he said, "built a manufacturing company almost 40 years ago. Steel components, not glamorous but very profitable. He sold most of his shares over the years, but he kept one thing quiet, a controlling stake placed in a trust meant for you. For me, we barely spoke the last 10 years of his life. He followed your life closely, Mrs. Olivia, more closely than you knew. He set the trust to release on your 35th birthday with the belief that by then you'd need it most not for money but for standing on your own." My 35th birthday was in 6 days. I sat there in that small office, stunned into silence, while Mr. Whitfield explained that I would soon control roughly 40% of a company worth more money than I could fully process at that moment. 40%, enough to make decisions no one could override. I asked him one question before I left: "Does my husband know about any of this?" "Not from us," he said. "This trust has been sealed for years. No one outside this office knew the details until today." I walked out of that building feeling like I'd stepped out of one life and into another without changing clothes. That night I told Derek only part of the truth. I said my grandfather had left me something, without giving numbers, without giving details. I wanted to see what he would do with a small piece of information. I didn't expect the transformation I witnessed over the next few days. Derek, who hadn't complimented my cooking in months, suddenly loved everything I made. Derek, who hadn't asked about my day in years, suddenly wanted to know everything: how the appointment went, what the attorney said, when exactly the money would come through. "We should talk about combining it into our investment accounts," he said one evening, far too casually. "I know a guy who can grow it fast." I smiled and told him I hadn't even seen the full paperwork yet. That was a lie. I had already read every document twice. Over the following days, I did something I'd never done before in 10 years of marriage. I started paying close attention. Really paying attention, the way you do when you finally stop giving someone the benefit of the doubt. I found out Derek's firm was in worse shape than he let on, behind on payments to a supplier, a big one. I found out through a work email he'd left open on our home computer, an email chain full of tense language between him and someone named Corbin, a partner at his firm. Then I found the name of the supplier company. It was the exact same steel components company my grandfather had built. I sat in our kitchen holding my phone, reading that name over and over, feeling something click into place like a lock finally finding its key. My husband's entire career, the career he used to make me feel small, depended on a company I was about to control. I didn't say a word to him, not yet. I called Mr. Whitfield the next morning and asked him everything I needed to know about my new position: voting shares, board meetings, the upcoming shareholder vote scheduled for the following week, the same week Derek's firm was set to renegotiate their supply contract. "You could attend," Mr. Whitfield said carefully. "As the majority stakeholder, your presence would carry significant weight." "Good," I said. "I want to be there." For the next several days, I played a role I never thought I'd have to play in my own home. I let Derek believe I was still confused about the inheritance, still leaning on him for guidance, still the woman from the anniversary dinner who did nothing while he handled the important things. He loved that version of me. He loved feeling needed again, feeling like the one steering the ship. Meanwhile, I met privately with the company's board, 3 men and 2 women who had run operations since before my grandfather passed, all of them curious and a little wary of the granddaughter who'd suddenly appeared with controlling shares. I asked questions. I listened more than I spoke. I learned the company's real numbers, its real struggles, and its real potential. By the day of the shareholder meeting, I understood that company better than I understood most things in my own life. The meeting was held in a conference room on the 14th floor of a building I'd never set foot in. Long table, tall windows, the kind of room built to make people feel small if they weren't careful. I walked in wearing a simple burgundy dress, my hair pulled back, feeling steadier than I had in years. Derek was already there. He was part of the negotiating team representing his firm, sitting near the far end of the table with 3 colleagues, including Grayson, his boss from the anniversary dinner. None of them noticed me at first. Why would they? I was just someone's wife in their eyes if they registered me at all. Mr. Whitfield walked in beside me and gestured toward the head of the table. Mrs. Olivia will be joining us today as the majority stakeholder, he announced. The room went quiet in a way I'll never forget. I watched Derek's face change in slow motion, confusion, then disbelief, then something close to fear. Olivia, he said, his voice cracking slightly, what is this? I sat down at the head of the table and folded my hands calmly in front of me. This is me, I said, finally doing something you've never given me credit for. Grayson looked between us, clearly putting pieces together that didn't fit the picture he'd laughed along with at that dinner. The meeting moved forward and I let the board present their findings first, the numbers, the current contract terms, the tension around late payments from Derek's firm. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I've reviewed the current agreement, I said, looking directly at Derek's side of the table. Given the payment history over the last 2 quarters, I don't believe the existing terms serve this company's interests anymore. I'm proposing new terms, effective immediately, with stricter conditions on delayed payments. Derek opened his mouth to object, but one of his own colleagues placed a hand on his arm, a silent signal to stay quiet. He knew, better than Derek did in that moment, that arguing with a majority stakeholder in a room full of board members was not a fight worth having. These are significant changes, Grayson said carefully, trying to keep his tone professional. Can we discuss this privately, perhaps set a time to? We can discuss it now, I said. I'm here, you're here, I don't see a reason to wait. For the next 20 minutes, I laid out terms that were fair but firm, terms that protected the company my grandfather built while making it clear that Derek's firm no longer had the leverage they thought they had. I watched Derek sit there, silent, red-faced, the same man who'd stood up at our anniversary dinner and called me lucky. He wasn't laughing now, neither was anyone else at that table. When the meeting ended, Derek caught up with me in the hallway, gripping my arm gently, his voice low and pleading. Why didn't you tell me? We could have handled this together as a team. A team, I repeated, letting the word sit in the air. Derek, you toasted to me doing nothing in front of your boss. You hid financial paperwork from me the same week you found out about this inheritance. There was no team, there was just me, finally seeing clearly. He didn't have an answer for that. Word travels fast in small professional circles, and within days, whispers about the meeting had spread through Derek's firm. His mishandling of the account, the late payments, the tension he'd created with a supplier that turned out to be run by his own wife, all of it painted a picture his firm didn't want attached to their name. 2 weeks later, Derek was let go. Not fired outright but pushed into a quiet resignation, the kind companies arrange when they want to avoid public embarrassment but still need someone gone. His financial mismanagement, both at work and apparently in our marriage, had become impossible to hide once people started asking questions. He came home the day he lost his job, looking like a man who'd aged 5 years in 5 weeks. You did this, he said, standing in our kitchen, the same kitchen where I used to cook dinners he barely thanked me for. You could have warned me, you could have protected me. I spent 10 years protecting you, I said quietly. 10 years making sure your life ran smoothly so you could focus on your career, and you stood up in front of your boss and called that nothing. I was joking, he said, but even he didn't sound convinced anymore. You weren't joking, Derek, you believed it, that's the difference. He sat down at our kitchen table, the fight draining out of him. What do you want me to say? I'm sorry, I was under pressure. I felt like I wasn't good enough and I took it out on you because it was easier than admitting I was struggling. I believed that he was struggling. I even believed part of his apology was real, but belief doesn't undo years of feeling invisible in your own marriage. I don't want an apology anymore, I told him. I wanted respect, and I wanted it before I ever needed a fortune or a company to earn it. You didn't give it to me when it counted. We didn't end things that night with shouting or slammed doors. It was quieter than that, sadder in some ways. We both understood, without saying it directly, that something had broken beyond repair. In the months that followed, I stepped further into my role at the company. I wasn't just a stakeholder attending occasional meetings. I became genuinely involved, learning the business from the ground up, spending time on the production floor, talking to employees who'd worked there since before I was born. My grandfather's old office still had his desk in it, worn and solid, like it was waiting for someone who understood what he'd built. I sat behind that desk for the first time on a quiet Tuesday morning, papers spread out in front of me, sunlight coming through the same window he probably looked out of for decades. I thought about the anniversary dinner, about the laughter at that table, about how small I felt walking those 8 blocks home alone. I didn't feel small anymore. Derek and I finalized our divorce a few months later. It was calm, almost businesslike, which felt fitting given everything that had happened. He moved to a smaller apartment across town. I heard through mutual friends that he was working again, somewhere quieter, somewhere with less pressure, and hopefully less need to make someone else feel small to feel big himself. As for me, I rebuilt that company alongside the board, expanding into markets my grandfather never had the chance to explore, hiring people who reminded me of myself years ago, capable, overlooked, waiting for someone to finally see them. I think about that toast sometimes, the woman who did absolutely nothing. I used to feel a flash of anger when I remembered it. Now I mostly feel something closer to gratitude, strange as that sounds. That single humiliating sentence cracked something open in me that had been closed for years. It forced me to stop accepting small versions of myself handed to me by someone who never truly saw the whole picture. I didn't get rich that year, I got seen. The fortune was just the door, walking through it, that part was mine. If you made it this far, I want you to know something. It's never too late to stop shrinking yourself for someone who never planned to make room for you. Whatever your version of that dinner table is, the moment someone made you feel small in front of everyone, you don't have to carry it forever. You get to decide what happens next. If this story meant something to you, tell me in the comments. What's one moment you finally stopped staying quiet? I read every single one. And if you want more stories like Olivia's, subscribe, because there are more women out there who found their voice after everyone told them they had none. I'll see you in the next one.